Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by IRI Consultants. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. In recent years, employers have seen an unprecedented surge in employee activism, making it a critical topic for HR and corporate leadership. But how should organizations respond to this surge, and what should a leader's response be to employee activism on the job? We've talked about this extensively on our website, and we wanted to bring in some diversity of thought on the subject. So my guest today is Arlene Hirsch, a career and psychological counselor and the author of a recent article for SHRM titled When and How Employers Should Respond to Employee Activism. Welcome to Project HR, Arlene.
Thank you.
So, Arlene, what do we mean when we talk about employee activism? Are we talking about an employee wearing apparel supporting a cause at work, or are we talking about pressuring the company to take a stand on an issue? I feel like there's a whole range of actions that could fall into this category.
Yeah, it is a broad category. I would define it as any action that employees take to either affect social change or changing employee policy, company policies. So it has both dimensions.
That makes sense. And initially, I think this interest in social justice was kind of spurred on by younger generations. Do you think that it's still strictly a generational phenomenon, or has it spread to all ages and generations?
Well, I'm a baby boomer, and I can tell you with some certainty that we took social action too when we were the same age as the younger generation.
Sure.
So it might be that younger generations bring more energy and passion initially to this, but I think every generation brings that. And in this case, I would say that while younger people are perhaps taking the lead or being the most vocal, I think all generations are concerned. So I know that my peers, my family, my friends are just as engaged and interested in social justice and as the younger people, and partly because it's our kids, right?
True.
We want a future for them.
Yeah.
So there's that. From the company standpoint, I think some of us older folks are in positions of authority and influence where we have decision-making power. So if we can join the generations together, I think you can make a big difference in how things are done.
So you mentioned having our kids in the workplace and being invested in these causes based on that. What are the dangers that workplaces face when employees become activists?
Well, I think there's a couple different issues. One is if they're publicly protesting company policies that obviously, or company practices that obviously can do reputational damage to the company. And the second thing would be if they are looking for to generate or to protest around a social issue that the employer may disagree with, then they may want to have a policy in place so that it's clear that when employees speak out, that they're representing themselves and not the company.
Mm-hmm. Do employee activists present any opportunities for the company as well?
They do. There's opportunities when there's an alignment, when the actions that the employees take or that they are pushing the employers to take reflect well on the company, or I would say align with company values, then it's an opportunity for the company, one, to reinforce their own values, and two, to create a stronger commitment and bond with their employees.
Interesting. And in your SHRM article, you talked about how companies must choose their battles. And of course, we've all heard that in parenting. How do you explain that as far as employee activism in companies?
So I think in the article, the person that I cited the most was Catherine Petralia, who's the one of the co-founders of a fintech company called Cabbage, which was acquired by American Express. And she had what I thought was a very thoughtful approach to this. the first question that she always asked is, what is the impact of this issue on our company? And how does this issue align with our company values? And so initially, I think what she said was it was after the Parkland shooting that that they came out, the company came out very strongly, and they actually, I mean, in a lot of cases, the employees are pushing the employers to take a stand, but in this case, the employer was pushing the employees to go to the protests, like they wanted them to go protest.
Mm.
And she said the reason is that they do a lot of funding of minority and women-owned businesses, and that those businesses and those communities are deeply impacted by gun violence. So they encouraged them. They gave them time off. They encouraged them to go to the protests. And then the other thing they did was that they changed their own internal policy so that they would not lend money or make loans to companies that sold bump stocks, semi-automatic weapons, or to people under 21.
Interesting. So I can definitely see how that kind of addresses what I was thinking my next question, which is how can a company avoid being accused of simply talking the talk? And they see those
Right.
opportunities, when it comes to these issues. How can companies get around that skepticism?
Well, right. So, so yeah, and I think the employees are very attuned to this. So,
Mhm.
like, if you're just coming out and you're making a statement, you're in support of Black Lives Matter, but you're not backing that, and you don't have a diverse
Mm.
company, you don't have a DEI policy, you look hypocritical.
Mhm.
So one of the examples that I'm aware of is there was a nonprofit. There is a nonprofit here in Chicago where they're after the George Floyd murder. They felt very strongly that they wanted they wanted the nonprofit to make a strong statement in support of Black Lives Matter. And the president of the nonprofit said, we do support Black Lives Matter, but we're concerned about the public scrutiny that would bring to our organization because we don't have enough diversity in our organization.
Mm.
So what they decided to do is they added 2 seats to their board of directors, and then they did a national search to add more diversity, to add 2 seats and more diversity
Hmm.
to the board. So they chose not to speak out because they wanted to correct what they perceived as an internal problem.
Yeah, that seems like a solid way to show true support. All right, Arlene, I'm going to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we return, I want to address how to manage dissent within the workplace. Stay with us.
Right now, labor relations is changing rapidly, and it can be frustrating if the tools you're using aren't keeping up. If you spend too much time searching for what you need, and it's challenging to collaborate with your teams, it's time to think about your employee communication differently. You need a labor relations communication platform that will help you connect with and educate employees, but you can easily end up paying too much or buying unnecessary tools when you just don't have the information you need about available options. That lack of knowledge can leave you with an inefficient toolset that doesn't help you solve problems effectively. Proofbox solves these problems by offering a robust labor relations library of videos, e-learning, and ready-to-use websites at an affordable price point. Never worry about finding the right message at the right time. No matter if you're educating employees or supervisors, if you're in the middle of a union organizing campaign, or just in preventive mode, Proofbox is like Netflix for labor relations, and we even allow you to share your resources company-wide with team member accounts. Learn more today at www.bit.ly/Proofbox and make sure your tools are keeping up with the pace of labor relations today.
I'm back with career and psychological counselor Arlene Hirsch. Now, Arlene, in the last segment, we were looking at primarily big picture issues, talking about employee values and how they might mesh with corporate values. But the other part of the story is when employee activists find themselves working with other activists who might hold different opinions than they do on these polarizing issues. How can leaders prevent their workplace from turning into a battleground?
To me, this is a very thorny issue. Um, you could take, I mean, the strongest stand I've seen on this subject is Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO of Coinbase. He actually mandated that employees are not allowed to talk politics at work.
Mm,
Um, and there were consequences for not doing that. I personally think that's a little bit rigid, but that there's a version of that you what you could do. And I think what you can do is you can bring your people together and say that you understand that people have strong opinions, and they feel strongly about things, but that we need to work together as a team toward common goals.
mm.
And so it would be better not to discuss politics or other controversial subjects while you're working together.
So, what kind of mistakes do you see leaders making when they try and manage that kind of dissent?
Well, I don't know if you see the Brian Armstrong, if you see that as a mistake, which is like, really prohibiting people from talking.
Hmm.
Some people would see that as a mistake. Some people see it as the right thing to do. I think it depends on the culture of your company. So whatever policy or stance you take, it has to be consistent with the way that your culture works. So if you're a speak up culture, right, and you've always encouraged people to speak up, you can't suddenly tell them to shut up,
Hmm.
right? But you can tell them to like take it offline,
Hmm.
right? Like we have some work to do. We need to focus on it. We need to work together,
Hmm.
and that would be better if you have those conversations on your own time.
So, are there policies or procedures we should put into place now to help us better manage that dissent that might show up down the road?
Well, I think you can anticipate what some of the problems are going to be. So if you like some companies, like have they have some rules or policies around like wearing t-shirts with slogans or caps with slogans
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
they know might be provocative to other people in the organization. Um, some they make some rules about like if you're planning to protest, for example, in a public place, that you not be wearing a company uniform or anything that indicates that you who you work for.
Hmm.
And then same thing with social media policies that you indicate on your social media that you are not representing the views of the organization.
Hmm. Hmm. That makes sense.
So you
So,
separate it.
yeah, for sure. So, in your article, you also mentioned the need for consistent enforcement of these kinds of policies and procedures. Why is that so important?
If you don't have an enforcement mechanism, then it doesn't make sense to have the policy because it will immediately be known that the policy is for show
Mhm.
and that you don't really care about it. And then you're inviting noncompliance.
So, when we talk about our role as HR leaders, specifically, what role should HR leaders play in preventing and managing this kind of dissent, as opposed to our supervisors and our leaders who are involved on a daily basis with employees?
So I think HR has a role throughout the entire life cycle of the process. And I would say that begins with taking some pulse surveys or some employee engagement surveys to find out what it is that employees are complaining about, concerned about, care about.
Hmm.
If that surfaces um, problems with company policies and practices, it would be helpful to know that and take action before employees feel that it's necessary to make that public. So that's a problem you could potentially solve internally. If there are social justice type issues, then I think the second question becomes working like making senior leaders aware of what are the issues that employees care about the most, and then making decisions about which which issues or causes you feel you can support, and then making your decisions, having some transparency around the decision-making process. You also the HR would need to work with the attorneys to make sure that the policies that you're putting in place are in compliance with the law. And then HR also is involved in the enforcement mechanisms. So you're in the whole life cycle.
Arlene, it's time for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is career and psychological counselor Arlene Hirsch. We are back. And Arlene, what about activism off the job? You mentioned, don't wear a company uniform if you're going to protest in the streets. Can an employee's activism out in public or even on social media impact the company?
It can. I think what I've seen is that different states, there are state laws that impact the decisions that companies make. So I believe, like in California, for example, companies are not allowed to prohibit their employees from protesting.
Mm-hmm.
But in other states, you can. So the first question, again, goes to the attorneys, I think, for what's legal and not legal. And then after you determine that, then I think the next question is, what is the impact on the employee if you tell them they can't be involved in causes that they care about? And what is the impact on your organization if they are publicly out involved in causes that you do not support?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the role of transparency in corporate response to employee activism. Why is
Yes.
transparency so critical?
Well, I think this is a trust issue, that if you make a decision not to support a cause that employees care about, I think it's important to explain why. So the example that I use in my article, again, comes back to Catherine Petralia, who's like one of my heroes now since I talked to her.
Mm-hmm.
There was a situation where there was a very devastating hurricane. Honestly, don't remember which one because we've had so many.
Right.
And the employees wanted the company to get involved in helping these businesses that had been devastated by the hurricane. And the company decided that this was not something that they wanted to get involved in, even though they are in the business of doing loans. And what she said was that the reason why, that they explained to the employees, is that that's the role of the federal government to provide disaster relief. And it's not their role as a private company to provide disaster relief. And so they chose not to, but not because they're heartless, right? But because it didn't fit with the purpose and the mission of the company, even though on the surface you might think that it would.
So I want to talk a little bit, going beyond transparency, what's the impact of a policy that silences employees? We talked about the Coinbase decision of no talking politics. Yeah. If you have a policy that says you can't protest, you can't talk about these things, what's the impact on the company? What's the impact on employees?
I think it's horrible. It's like I think you want to encourage a culture where people do feel free to be themselves within reason, right? And to bring their whole selves to work. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So like, if you're this hard dichotomy where like you have to be one person at work and not share or talk about the things that you care about, and then go out in the world, and then you're saying, oh, but you can't go out in the world and do that either. Like, I think that's a recipe for turnover.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Or poor morale.
Mm-hmm. Or both.
So,
right.
Right. But I think I think you're going to lose people if you do that. Like, you're not allowing them to engage with the things that they care about because you want their whole life to be dominated by your values.
Yeah, and speaking of politics, we're fast approaching midterm elections here, a time that's always fraught with polarizing opinions and beliefs. Do you have any tips for us on how our leaders can help manage political dissent, specifically at work?
So this comes back to something I was saying before. Is I do think you can ask your employees not to talk about politics at work,
Hmm.
just because it's so heated right now, and people feel so strongly that it really does detract from trying to get the work done.
Hmm.
And it takes people pretty far off course in terms of like what they're focused on at work, and that they should still be focused on work.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. So if our listeners want to find out more about you, about your firm, where can we go?
So I appreciate your asking me that. The name of my website is kind of an obvious one. It's arlenehirsch.com,
Okay.
and all the information about me is there.
Okay, perfect. I want to let everybody know that a link to Arlene's website will be included in this episode's companion guide. Be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Arlene, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions I ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Not that quick, but go ahead.
Ready as you'll ever be, right? Our
Yeah.
first question is a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about employee activism. So, in your opinion, Arlene, which of these corporate responses is worse? The refusal to engage on any social issue or to engage on all of the issues?
I think they're equally bad.
Very good. All right.
It's not going to help you, but I think they're equally bad.
So, Arlene, what is the best book that you've read recently?
I am a big Randy Rainbow fan, and my sister-in-law for my birthday bought me a copy of his memoir that's called Playing with Myself.
Very good. Very good. All right.
Provocative title, but if you know who Randy Rainbow is, it's not a surprising title.
Perfect. All right. Next question. What is your favorite thing about the work that you do?
Because I'm a career counselor, I like helping people make good career decisions and helping them find good jobs.
Nice. All right. Next, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I would say not to try to make everyone happy and not to expect everyone to like you.
Very good.
It's very liberating, honestly. It is. It's very liberating.
For sure. For sure. All right. Last question. Who or what inspires you?
Since I've been writing for SHRM, I would say I have just met some remarkable HR people who are making a huge difference.
Nice. I like that. We appreciate our listeners as well who are in the HR sphere. Thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Arlene.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank those listening in. Don't forget that we took great notes on this episode for you. You can grab those notes for free at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Now, if you're ready for your Project HR debut, our team is always looking for outstanding guests. Let us know about your expertise by emailing us at projecthr@iriconsultants.com. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to Project HR. A new episode drops every Thursday. And drop me a line. Leave me a review. Give the show a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's all for this week's episode of Project HR. Let's make it a great day at work.